Hi, welcome back to part 2 of our first case study. In the last one, we left off where we had just finished removing some lens distortion, and we sort of leveled things out and straightened them out, so we've got a nice, relatively square image here where the verticals in our structure here are pretty close to parallel. And we had a little bit of image area at the bottom that was gone from our lens correction. I went ahead and just cropped the very bottom of this, so it's gone. I'll show you here. You can see that little bit that I cropped out. Next, I'd like to show you what we can do with this HSL box here. And HSL just stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. So we have these three things we can control, three aspects of all of these color channels here that we have. We can change the hue, change how saturated the color is. This one I can see. Let's just default these. Default this. And default this. We can also change the luminance, or how bright these things are. We could also convert it to grayscale, and now we can change. We obviously can't change the hue or the saturation anymore, but we can change how bright each of these are. So I can take all the oranges, make those darker. You can see there's a lot in this image. Brighten it up. So if I wanted to go the black and white route with this, there's a lot that we could do. A lot of people think that all black and white images are basically just a color image with everything desaturated, but that's not the case. We could have an infinite number of combinations of adjustments here and make really come up with a lot of different flavors of a black and white of this same image. Let's actually go back to color. So we can, if we look at this, we can get a pretty good idea of what sorts of colors are in here, and we can adjust it with the slider. But most of the time, I would say, unless you're dealing with something, maybe you're in the studio and you have control over all of the colors, through the styling, lighting, and backdrop and things like that. Then you could have that much control. But outside, you're typically not going to run into pure colors. And so you might look at something and feel that one of these three elements of that color needs to be changed, but you can't put your finger on exactly what that color is. It's probably a blend of these things. So rather than have to play around with each slider and try to figure out the right combination, if we use our targeted adjustment tool in combination with these, we can work much faster. So let's go to hue. Let's say I wanted to adjust the hue of this. I click and hold down, and then with your mouse or your trackpad or whatever, if I move up, I can skew the hue this direction, and then I pull it down, I can go this direction. So you can see it's mostly orange with some yellow in it. I can bring this here. It starts to look like it has a little bit more. It's taking the orange and dragging it more in the direction of red, and it's also taking the yellows and making them a little bit more orange. You can see if I had something that was red here and I drag it down this way, it takes it more in the direction of magenta, which connects here. Same if I take the magenta this way, it becomes more purple. If I take my purples this way, they become more blue. So you can see how these are all connected to each other. So what we did is basically just add a little bit more, give this more of a red-orange feel rather than a orange-yellow. And I think that's pretty good. Outside here, there is some green. I'd like to try to emphasize that a bit more. Let's zoom in, try to find it, and click. Make sure we're clicking in the right area. There's a little bit here in this tree. Let's see if we can make that green a little bit more green. Unfortunately, it's kind of a dusty green. May be tough to do. Let's change saturation. So I can boost the saturation. You can see there's a lot of yellow that's coming with it too. So this might be an instance maybe we can help it out with just a slider. Let's look around. There's not a whole lot out there. There's a little bit here and there. Tiny bit down there. Zoom back out. And luminance. We can also, any green in here, we can make it pop a little bit more by making it a little bit darker. Mostly this is warmer tones though, so we're not going to get a whole lot of mileage out of that. So those are a few things we could do with the color. Because this image has a lot of the same tones in it, in some ways it's simpler because you just make a few adjustments and it kind of affects the whole image or most of it. But the next thing that I know we're going to have to deal with in this image, if you recall, this was the darker exposed image, and most of this interior here was very, very dark. It's a pretty safe bet we're going to find some noise in here, and I'm starting to see it already. You can see there's kind of a screen door pattern in here. You see some horizontal lines. We start to see some it looks like a kind of grainy, but it's a little bit different because it has this pattern to it. Film grain is much more randomized, and it doesn't really have a pattern that repeats, whereas noise does, and that's part of what makes it a pretty ugly, unattractive feature in an image. And if you've got color noise too, it kind of brings some splotchiness to the colors. You can see in here there's some strange little greens, and so we're going to need to deal with that. If we go right next door to the HSL tab, there's detail. We go in here. This is where we can sharpen the image and also where we can deal with noise reduction. I'd actually like to add a bit of sharpening now because it's going to help me see the noise a little bit better. It's going to make it stand out more. So we added a little bit of sharpening here. Here you can see this should be a nice warm colored wood. We can see the wood grain in here, but the noise is really getting in the way of some of that detail. So if we first start with luminance, luminance is the, think of those as some of the hot pixels that you'll see popping up here and there. Let's just, so you can see, we're bringing the slider all the way over. Got rid of a lot of that kind of noise, but it also did it at the expense of detail everywhere in the photo. Now see, this looks kind of smeared. We don't want it to have that fake painting look to it, which is what happens if you use too much noise reduction. So we got to bring that back down. I'm not going to use a whole lot because we have a lot of fine texture and detail in here that we need to preserve. So that looks a little bit better. Next I'm going to go to color noise, because I think that's probably the biggest problem in here is this color noise. There's no reason we should be seeing green here. So let's adjust that. You can see it's getting a lot cleaner looking. Let's move back down. There it is, off. We move to the other extreme. It's basically gone. But there's still some here. Let's bring that up a bit more and see if that helps. That helps some. But again, if we process out too much of the noise, then we're going to throw away a lot of this great detail in the wood grain. So let's bring this down to where we just are on the ragged edge of seeing the noise come back. We only want to correct it as much as it needs and no more. So here I see it looks pretty blotchy. Right around there I think is pretty good. Let's zoom back out. And that's not too bad. Let's turn off that clipping warning. That looks pretty good. Let's look in here. This was an area that was kind of important to me because of this fine detail in here. And that looks pretty good. Zoom back out. Now let's return to our sharpening. I'd like to show you something here. Let's zoom in and get to some areas where we have some texture and detail. I'll show you if we turn it up all the way, this stuff really does pop and it feels a bit more gritty. But let's zoom in. If we were to make a large print of this, we'd want to really be careful with how much sharpening we had because it's going to stand out a lot more. Looking at something on your computer, it's easy for things to be overdone because you're not looking at it in a whole lot of detail the way you would with a large format print. You have the ability to get right up close to it, and when I look at this now I can see the sharpening has made some weird kind of edginess around this. Let's bring it back down. We were around 50. I think that's a lot better. If you'll notice in this sharpening section here, this masking slider, right now the sharpening is being applied to basically every pixel in the image. Masking will help you preserve areas of kind of smoother tone, and as you go further to the right, it sharpens only the areas that have the sharpest texture in them already. So one little trick you can do, if you press down the Option key and hold it down while you drag the mask slider, you can see this is sharpening is being applied to the whole image. Down at this end, it's only those hard edges. So we can kind of choose which areas that we want sharpened and which we want preserved. I think if we start to go this direction, it's going to sharpen more of the texture in the wood. There is a lot of texture out the windows here. We have concrete, we've got lots of bushes, the road, everything in here has there's a lot of texture here. So in this case I'm not going to use too much masking. If we were working on a portrait, I would probably have most of it masked so that I don't sharpen smooth skin tone areas. But that's how that tool works. So if we step back now and look at our image, we've done quite a bit to it. And when you don't have to explain it to someone as you do it, this could go a lot faster. We've taken about a half an hour to work on this, but really all of these adjustments, when you know how to do them, can take a few seconds to a few minutes. And we've corrected a lot of the flaws that the image originally had, and when we compare with our original exposure, you can see how many problems there were with this one. This one here feels more natural. It has a little bit more drama to it. But we haven't had to sacrifice. We've got detail inside and out, and so we haven't had to make really too many compromises.